back to the podcast, fam. Who You Are Is Okay. Clayton Reed Jones, CRJ. The author of the book, Who Else Could It Be But God? My relationships led me to him. My current memoir is entitled Trauma. My love letter to the world. I got to give a special shout out to the man who produces the music for this podcast, none other than Cam Sounds. You guys can find Cam on Instagram at Cam_Sounds. You can also find him on Instagram at Cam Sounds and Vibrations. You can check him out on Facebook, Cameron J. Starrett, and also check out his website, camsgotmusic.com. If you guys ever in the Baltimore DMV area, check out his show. You can follow him and find out where he may be performing. It's a great live show. He does everything from jazz, hip hop, R&B, neo soul, and he also does, his original productions. Also, I just want to give him mad love because during the pandemic, like I said before in previous podcasts, himself and his drummer, they went out on the street and they did pop-up concerts for the people to uplift people, and I thought it was beautiful and it was much needed. So mad love to you, Cam, for that. Also want to give a special shout out to my man Dre of Influential Productions and Dante Johnson for creating the artwork. Fam, this episode is close to my heart. I have a special guest, and the reason it's so close to my heart is because I have a testimony of myself regarding leaving work and walking away from my job and dealing with feeling like I didn't have any resource, anybody fighting on behalf of me and my employment. I felt conflicted in my employment at different times, and I had a lot of fear associated with, do I step out on faith and walk away, or do I stay and deal with it? And fortunately for me, the fear of staying there was greater than the fear of leaving. So that ultimately pushed me out the door. It made me take a leap of faith. And don't get me wrong, there was a lot of struggle with that, and I fell flat on my face, but it was only for me to be picked up, rise, and see that I could trust the process and know that, you know, my life has a journey and it's destined to be a certain thing that's written. So regardless of what it may look like, I'm going to find my way to that destiny. We all will. So, and this is why this episode is so special to me, because this gentleman that I have, this special guest, he actually was faced with a conflict himself, dealing with, you know, working in the corporate world and his moral compass, his spirituality. And I was really excited when he reached out to him and he talked about, you know, maybe having a conversation about the intersection between spirituality, consciousness, and career. And he has a wonderful testimony. Like, instead of kind of like feeling like he didn't have anywhere to go and bitching and complaining about his job, and his job is weighing him down, he felt like he wanted more out of life. He saw more within himself. He decided to do something about it, and he started his own company, consulting business. But I'm going to let him tell you guys a lot about it. But he's ultimately the definition of be the change that you want to see. Be the change. So, you know, without further ado, and me just talking, I'm going to introduce you guys to my dear friend, Ryan McShane. I met him actually at Fit Gym. And we shared a spiritual connection, and the conversations were beautiful. So it only makes sense that we're here now today doing this. So, Ryan, how you feeling? And what's up? And say hello to everybody, whoever's listening to my podcast.
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Clayton. It's just such an honor and a pleasure to be speaking to your audience. And I'm so grateful that we've stayed in touch over these years. As you had mentioned, we met at Fit Gym, and we always had some awesome conversations that really lifted me. And I just always appreciated that. And I'm so glad that we have that connection. You know, yeah, as you mentioned, I'm the owner and operator of an HR consulting firm called HR Evolution. And just to tell your guests a little bit about what I do, it's really three major functions that I perform. I provide small to medium-sized business HR consulting. So for those smaller companies who can't afford a full-time HR person, I provide on-call HR services so that we can avoid and mitigate their risk, as well as help them establish a culture that attracts and retains top talent so that they can thrive as a business. And then I also provide leadership development training, and that's really where my heart is. I've been subject to a lot of authoritarianism And I think that any of us can really look around and recognize exactly what I'm talking about. You know, most people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. And that's what I try to work towards, is making sure that people have the best kind of leadership that inspires them and maintains their continuous growth. And so when I'm not working on leadership development or HR consulting, I support people in career transition. So I do a lot of resume writing and LinkedIn profiles and interview skills development. And so, you know, the real benefit of all of that, Clayton, is I get to work directly hand in hand with business owners and C-suite professionals to really effectuate change and see the impact of my work. And to your point, in the corporate environment, I didn't always enjoy that experience of seeing the direct impact of my work. I felt like I was just kind of another cog in the big system, if you will.
Yes.
And, you know, to give you a sense of my background and where I came from and how that brought me to where I am today, I started my career right out of college working for the federal government. I was working for the DOD in Aberdeen Proving Grounds at a place called the Northeast Civilian Personnel Operations Center. Just kind of rolls off your tongue, doesn't it? Basically, that big long name that stood for the fact that I provided HR services to local Army installations. And so I would provide staffing and job classification services. Well, you know, it didn't take me long to figure out pretty quick that when I started hearing things like, slow down, kid, you're making us look bad, or, you know, don't work too hard. Why are you trying so hard? You know, type of things. And meanwhile, every day, this lady who I sat next to fell asleep at her desk every single day. And I knew that she got paid thousands of dollars more than me because she was hired 2 years before me. So in a federal government system, it's seniority-based payment. It's not based on merit. It's not based on what productivity or contribution you make. So I had difficulty with that. You know, I wanted to be in control of my own career. And so seeing the writing on the wall that, you know, this was just such a bureaucratic environment. I felt bloodied, beaten, and battered from all the red tape and brick walls that I was running into. I went to the complete opposite end of the spectrum in my next role, and I went to work for a .com in downtown Baltimore. Okay. And there I supported a little under 30 clients throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, as well as Chicago, LA, and Vegas. And they'd call on me for everything under the HR umbrella, you know, from writing an employee handbook to mediating employee relations issues to advising them on their internal structure and best practices across human resources. Well, the .com bubble burst and I found myself downsized. And this was the first time in my career I was ever downsized. And, you know, you probably recognize the pain of being let go from a job for no fault due to your own. You know, in fact, it was the CFO who, you know, made some poor investments and poor financial decisions that ultimately affected me in my career. And that's when I went into the space of long-term care. And I was the HR manager for the corporate office, but I provided all the soft skills training for 850 plus employees across 3 different locations. And this is a place where I felt like I found home. You know, they had core values. And one of those core values that I always remember is learning for the purpose of teaching. That just always resonated with my heart. And I think that's what most people are really looking for, is that kind of environment where they can give back and be of support to others. Clayton, you have a question?
Yeah, that's interesting. Learning for the sake of teaching. I also believe that teaching is something that's innate in us. Whenever we obtain information, it's almost like innately, it calls you to want to give that information and pass that information along. So I thought that was very interesting that, you know, you made that statement, learning for the sake of teaching. That's incredible. Like, that's where it's at, not learning for the sake of capitalizing necessarily.
Well, that's exactly right. I'm a firm believer that rising tides raises all ships. And so, you know, if I can help others benefit by sharing my knowledge, that obviously everyone's going to benefit as a result of it. not only does it ingrain that teaching or that learning further within me when I teach it and share it with others, but others can benefit as a result of it. And I've seen the opposite in action too, Clayton, where people say knowledge is power and I'm going to hold it close to my vest and not share it with other people.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I've worked against those kind of crowds as well. So long story short with that, after about a year of working with this company, this was around the 2004, 2005 timeframe where the height of conversation was the insolvency of Medicare and Medicaid. And so what happened is this long-term care organization overinvested in capital projects, expecting that a lot of boomers and seniors would be purchasing their homes and independent living units and nursing homes and assisted living care. And that wasn't the case. So they fired the CFO, they hired a new CFO, and what's he supposed to do but find money? Well, he saw HR as a cost center. So it was one of those last in, first out, highest paid kind of things. I was downsized now a second time. And I thought, you know what, security is a pretty good thing. My wife was 8 months pregnant at the time I was downsized. So to say that I was a little stressed would be an understatement. And that's when I learned never say never. And that's when I went back to public sector and I worked for Baltimore County Department of Aging as the HR director for about 12 years. And when I came into that environment, I knew that I had a lot of work cut out for me. Very first day on the job, I said, can I have a copy of my job description? They said, you don't have one. I said, what? You just told the HR guy that you don't have job descriptions around here? And so I knew I had a lot of work cut out for me. Long story short, in that regard, I was able to implement a great deal of infrastructure and HR practices that should have been in place for a long time to begin with. But I really thrived in that environment. Well, the leader that I worked under that hired me into the organization ended up retiring about 5 years later. And so the person to replace that leader, her modus operandi in life was don't stick out your head for fear it'll be chopped off. And so as a natural change agent, that flew in the face of everything that I believed in. I think that you always need to challenge the status quo.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And so I started to encounter an environment where I was being told, just do the basics, Ryan. You don't need to do this. You don't need to do that. Just kind of sit back and just do the basics. And that environment started to really eat away at my soul as I sat at my desk and could see problems around me and see how I could potentially solve those problems and continuously be told, we don't really want to solve those problems. That was something that I couldn't sit with. And so I started building.
Let me ask you this. Why couldn't you sit with that? You said it was eating at your soul. Kind of describe some of the thoughts, some of the things you were feeling during that time. Like,
well, we would spend every Monday morning in leadership meetings, and we would spend about an hour of 5 people talking at each other instead of with each other. And as we talked at each other, I would hear there's this problem and there's that problem and there's this problem. And I'd go back to my desk and say, how can I address these problems that we continuously talk about? And each week I'd come back, well, what if we do this? And what if we do that? Oh, well, wait, whoa, that might solve the problem, but that sounds like a lot of work. I'm not sure we want to do that. So what I realized very quickly was we had all the resources and know how to solve our problems. We didn't have the will to solve our problems. And so that told me everything that I needed to know, that the mindset, the conditioning, we're just going to do enough just to get by without getting in trouble around here. That was antithetical to who I believe I am and who I believe our workforce should be. We should always be on continuous growth and evolution and changing. And that's why I named my company HR Evolution.
HR Evolution. Yeah, that's a great name. It's some of us that I'm going to speak for a few. We have the mindset that we believe that sometimes when there's resistance like that, you don't want to grow, true growth, true empowerment, things that's really going to benefit the employees and empower the employees. We think there's some type of conspiracy behind it.
Yes.
And you're a person that's, been on the inside. Are those conspiracies, I'm sure you know some of the conspiracies we come up with as to why these things happen. Does those things have any merit at all?
We all have individual egos and individual agendas. And so oftentimes we operate based on those. I believe the leader at the helm was very conflict avoidant. So this person, while she would beat on her chest on a regular basis and say, I believe in leadership, I believe in leadership, it's all about leadership. Meanwhile, the same person would come in at 9 o'clock in the morning, shut her office door behind her, and you wouldn't see her until 4 o'clock in the afternoon when she left at the end of the day. Right. So the messaging and what the behavior was completely opposite of one another. Right. Right. And so that was an environment that was very unsettling for anyone who operated within that.
Right. Why do you think that is, though? You think it's just strictly ego that was driving the contradiction? Or do you think it's something else? Like, 'cause I felt like my experience, I always had this attitude that you had people seeking, it was like crabs in the barrel mentality. So it's like, I'm going to try to, I'm going to promote the brand. I'm going to promote the mission statement, but that's all smoke because I just have another agenda. I have a personal agenda here. Yeah. And my personal agenda is to get ahead at all costs. Right. So you understand what I mean? Yes. Like, is it,
well, I think the personal agenda of the person that was at the leadership helm during this time was, I just want to collect my retirement as a leader in this organization without too much trouble. And I recall this person communicating to her administrative assistant is, don't they get it? We just want to do as little as possible and still collect a paycheck and get up out of here and retire eventually. Okay. And, that's not what drives me. To sit back and collect money and do as little as possible. Okay. I really saw that, that's no existence. That's no life in and of itself. And not to mention, how does that affect the people that we serve?
Right. Now, do you think there's a disconnect between the CEOs, like the people that really own the business and their representatives in terms of upper management? Do you think that there's a disconnect in terms of they want more from these people, or do you think they're all in lockstep to some degree with some of the decisions that's being made in terms of employees and empowerment and information and things like that, and doing the best you can do in terms of your people and the work that you're producing?
I've been exposed to a lot of different types of leaders throughout my career, and I don't want to broad brush, stroke and say that they were all like this or they were all like that. Different ones brought different things to the table. Most of the leaders that I interact with today are very much aligned to making sure that their company is successful. Now, how that happens is a whole different story. There's many paths that will deliver that success. It's just, what do we want to experience during the journey to that success? And that's how I help people guide. Look at capitalism in and of itself today. Capitalism, as it was originally created by Samuel Adams, is very different than what we experience today. We experience a lot of crony capitalism and doing anything at any cost to realize profit. And so sometimes that includes doing things illegally or doing things unethically.
The ends justify the means.
That's exactly right. But real conscious capitalism comes from a standpoint of, we're going to do no one thing in benefit of one stakeholder to the detriment of other stakeholders. Whereas many capitalist environments, it's all about competition, and it's predicated on this notion of I win, you lose. Well, I don't think that we operate in that kind of false binary. And I think those false binaries are set up for us to divide ourselves all too often. I think we can all win. And that's where we go back to the rising tides raises all ships. And so, we were having a great conversation about HR yesterday. And You know, sometimes people have very bad opinions about human resources, and, you know, whether or not they're an employer representative or an employee representative.
I'm one of them. I'm one of those individuals. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And a lot of times it can be predicated on your prior conditioning. You know, did HR help you out, or did they just toe the company line and tell you what their leaders told them to tell you, type of thing? You know, when people ask me, am I an employee advocate or am I a management advocate?
Right.
I'll tell them I'm a values advocate.
Okay.
What do you value? And so honesty, integrity, learning for the purpose of teaching, giving back, and serving, and making sure that we have a stakeholder orientation, not just a stockholder orientation. And I think those are important things to come across and understand. You know, we have two types of cultures that exist in organizations today. There's a conscious culture and there's an unconscious culture. And I think it's easiest to first define the unconscious culture because I think we've all experienced it. The unconscious culture sounds a lot like this. Why are we doing it this way? I don't know. We've always done it this way. Or because Tom told us we should do it this way. Meanwhile, Tom hasn't worked for this company for 10 years, but we're still doing it the way Tom told us how to do it. Now, the conscious culture, in contrast to the unconscious culture, is we stand back and we ask ourselves, how do we want to operate? How do we want to interact with one another? How do we want our customers to see us? How do we want to fight when we have conflicts? Is it a no holds barred bloody cage match, or can we disagree with one another with respect and work towards a solution? That really speaks to the elements of a conscious culture, where it fosters awareness as well as individual and collective reflection as a means of promoting ongoing learning, growth, and development for everyone involved. That's the kind of climate and environment that I seek to operate within and advocate for.
What do you say to the person that says all the things you're describing is just the ideal?
Yes. So why not shoot for the ideal? Why would we be?
They said people dismiss the ideal and say that can never happen. It's just the ideal. What do you say to that?
I would say, once again, you're buying into a false binary.
My man.
All too often we say it's either this or it's got to be that. We live in an infinite universe, Clayton. Yes. Why would we relegate ourselves to two choices?
Just two choices.
You know, there is so much relative in between that. And why not shoot for the ideal, knowing that we're going to fall short every time? But, you know, the other aspect of that is just being complacent enough to say, it is what it is. Let's just go along to get along. And that go along to get along has caused more detriment in our society and our businesses than anything combined.
How so?
Well, I think that we have been conditioned on an environment of authoritarianism. And what I mean by authoritarianism, you probably heard it and experienced it. Do what I tell you because I'm your boss. And so, and if you don't do those things, you're going to be punished in some way, shape, or form. So I think for many people, it's easiest to just say, all right, I'm going to go along to get along. But they don't offer up the dissenting opinions or the dissenting perspective that would help save the organization when they're starting to go off the cliff. You know, these leaders who are surrounding themselves by yes people because they've been conditioned not to negate what the leader has to say, then the leader never hears a realistic perspective of what's going on around them. And so therein lies the detriment that too many organizations experience because of this authoritarian notion.
Yeah, what does that spawn into in terms of a company's life? Like, how does that manifest itself into a company's life? Like, show me some examples of what pop up as a result of that kind of.
It creates a toxic culture. It creates a very toxic culture. And so what do you start having happen is that there's internal competition. And you probably heard the saying, a house divided amongst itself will surely fall. You know, you'd be surprised how many corporations operate based on internal competition. Well, what does that create? It creates backbiting and backstabbing and all kinds of internal behaviors that are not collaborative. They don't promote creativity. They don't promote relationships. They promote just accomplishing the goal, whatever that goal is.
Well, how do we get companies to understand that when they're constantly thriving because they're driven by the bottom line? If none of these things are affecting the bottom line, how do you get them to listen?
Here's the question. Are they truly thriving?
That's a great question.
They may be meeting their goals, but at what cost? And are they measuring that cost? So, recently I was recruited to go work for an organization as their HR director. This organization has 60% turnover. So they're a profitable organization. They have millions of dollars in the bank. Okay, but they had 60% turnover. Imagine if I was able to cut that turnover in half to 30%. Now, would you be thriving? You'd certainly be thriving at a higher level than you ever were before.
Well, here's the question. And some of us believe that these companies want the turnover because now, instead of that salary increase growing, the turnover, you bring people in on entry-level salaries, and it's almost like what they're trying to do in the NFL right now with the adapting the collegiate model. They're trying to recycle players every 4 or 5 years like colleges do, so they won't have to pay them that second contract, that big contract, and they put together a system that they believe that they can find the talent to fit the system. It doesn't matter the name on the back of the jersey. It doesn't matter your resume, so to speak, your skill set. I got a system-friendly operations here that I can plug and go, anyone. So now with the turnover, I'm at a steadfast profit because I'm not paying a lot for labor. This country, however way you want to look at it, was built on the back of not paying for labor. A lot of these corporations grew off of free labor. So some of that turnover they invite. Is that not accurate?
No, I think it is accurate. And when I first came to Baltimore County, it wasn't long after that I was there that they were offering early retirement incentives. Yes. And it was just for that very point is, hey, we don't want to be paying these top salaries. Let's get these people off the payroll as quickly as possible. We will pay you to go away because it's less expensive to continue to pay you to work. Yeah. And so my first concern was, what are you going to do with all that institutional knowledge? These are people that have been working for your organization for 20, 25, 30, 35 years. Are you sure you just want to let it go? All that great institutional, they know where the bodies are buried. They know what works, what doesn't work, And so why aren't we capturing that institutional knowledge before it retires to a beach in Delaware or Florida? That was my big concern. And I remember asking the executive, the county executive at that time, I said, don't you have concern about loss of institutional knowledge? And he said, Ryan, I see turnover as a good thing. I see new blood as a good thing. And that was the end of the conversation. Right. So to your point, there are some people who say, no, it's a good thing to continuously have this turnover. Here's the problem. No one asked the people that are being served what they think about turnover. Because what is going to happen when you constantly turn over the people that serve you? The customer service breaks down. The quality of work breaks down. The performance breaks down. If you're constantly bringing in new hires and you're probably not even training those new hires properly and passing along all that institutional knowledge, what are you left with? Poor performers. Right. But in a public sector environment, you don't have competition.
Well, unfortunately, we're living in a world that the only way the customer has a voice is when the customer stops participating.
That's right.
Too often, a lot of things we're being served, they create addicts out of us. We become addicted to them. Yes. And regardless of how we treat it, regardless of the service, we still patronize because we're addicted. We're hooked.
Yeah.
And that's another exactly, the smartphone, all these things that I spoke about, the NFL, everything. We're so addicted we can't let go. So here again, going back to some of us that believe in conspiring to create this kind of climate and environment and capitalism, for capitalism to thrive in that way, we believe that it comes from thought tanks. It comes out of understanding people's nature and doing things deliberate to hook them, to addict, get them to be an addict. Like that's, when you look at marketing and branding and all that stuff is conditioning. And you understand what I mean? So
I do.
You make a good point. And service will suffer, things will suffer because that knowledge is going out the door. But here again, how do you get these companies to believe in something other than just the bottom line?
That's a good question. So what is the legacy that you want to leave? Do you want to leave that you worked really hard and made a lot of money? Okay. Yeah. Is that a legacy, really? I think a lot of people have worked hard and made money. But what kind of difference do you want to make before you exit this world? And that's where I want to play what's called, Simon Sinek calls the infinite game, where we know we never really finish the game, but we're always advancing. We're always growing. We're always evolving. And that's the game that I want to be in. It's not a matter of, did I make $1 million? Okay, I'm going to check that box off, and then I'm done. I've arrived. I've made my mark. Well, at the end of the day, I can't take that $1 million with me. So what did that do? But if I was able to evolve, people's thinking, their approach to work, and making sure that work is not the drudgery that it's defined to be in the dictionary, that this is a way that we can evolve whole communities and societies and lift them out of poverty through the approach to work, then I want to be a part of that, because that is generational change. That's not just one person doing something for themselves. That's selfless, and that's giving back to the world around you.
Right. To me, sometimes that takes a level of enlightenment. And when you're so consumed with the bottom line and you're driven by the bottom line, that's a major distraction. And that enlightenment we talk about, that expansive consciousness and becoming, aware of that kind of existence, it takes an inner journey. And it takes it takes quieting down, separating yourself from the distractions and really becoming one with self and really reflecting and internalize the life you're living and the things you're doing. So with the hustle and bustle of the rat race and corporate America, things of that nature, it's extremely hard for a person to walk into that kind of light,
One of my favorite sayings is, it doesn't have to be that way anymore. And I think that it really speaks to breaking down the conditioning that we all have experienced. When I talk about work and some of the toxic cultures and toxic behaviors that we've experienced, people just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, it is what it is. That's just the way it is at work. Or when you talk about politics and some of the egregious behaviors that you see from politicians, we just say, that's politics. It is what it is. Well, wait a second. It doesn't have to be that way. And we have sat back and said, it is what it is, just accepting it and continuously going along with it. Where is the person who says, this is no longer coherent to who we are as people? This doesn't align with my soul, so I'm going to change it.
Well, one of the people where one of those persons are is right here sitting on this Zoom call with me, because, obviously you've been driven, by that. Another person is a person like myself. I don't necessarily believe in waging war against the system. I believe in inspiring people, pulling the power from within out, because I want to speak to their heart. So I just try to speak to people's heart and allow that heart to guide instead of trying to wage a war, because that's more encrypted and that can go unnoticed, and that can be a lot more clever and more effective, because most people, they love the feeling of having a revelation of their own, or coming into a bright idea or discovering something. So while you're watering that seed, it's more powerful when they believe that it just all came from within, you know, as opposed to someone trying to guide, coach, tell, that kind of thing. I just think that's but I think every single method plays a part in the big picture. So you have people out there advocating for things, that's great. Then you have some people that's just living by example, that's great. You know, and then some people are just dropping little gems based on their own life experience with the intent to awaken, but not to say, hey, I'm awakening you. You understand what I'm saying? So
I do.
Yeah, it's one of those things, but I definitely think the planet is actually, we're under a shift, and I do believe we're experiencing a great awakening.
I agree 100%.
That's been talked about, you know, years ago, the age of Aquarius and the songs being sung. I feel like we're in that age now, and we're going to see a lot of phenomenal things start to occur. We're seeing them now, but if people would just, and they'll get there, if they'll just not be so quick to run to the distractions, to the addictions, to the pharmaceutical companies, to the medications, to the politicians, to the news media. If we just let nature run its course, I think we'll see some phenomenal things, you know.
Well, I want to speak to the nature thing, because I think that's very important. When you look at human nature, and then contrast human nature to what we experience in many corporate environments. Many corporate environments are run, predicated on a system of management by intimidation. So there's a constant and continuous presence of fear. Fear that if you don't do this or you don't do that, then you're going to get in trouble. And then that is compounded by the element of time. So we have the time-bound structure of you need to do this or that by X date. So what does fear and time constraints do to your ability to be creative and problem solve?
Great question.
It reduces it dramatically. And what do leaders constantly tell us? We don't have any critical thinkers. We don't have any problem solvers, because you've deconditioned it out of people based on the culture and the climate that you have created around this authoritarian system that says either do it or else. And so that's why I am so passionate about the leadership notion, because I subscribe to what's called servant leadership. That leader is there for the purpose of serving his followers and equipping the followers with the resources to accomplish whatever the overall purpose, vision, or mission is within the organization.
And
so let's get back to human nature.
That's the true definition of leadership. A leader understands, he doesn't look at himself as a leader, he looks at himself as a servant.
Yes.
That is so true.
Yes. And that's largely what I provide in terms of leadership development training for my clients, is that shift, that opportunity to safely shift from thousands of years of conditioning that we've all experienced, and collectively we're experiencing in these now moments, this authoritarian model, which does not cohere to who we are as a society anymore. We have seen the presence of it and the detriment of it to many societies and communities that no longer exist because of the authoritarian model.
History taught us.
And we can't fight a power that is so monolithic like this. What we do, as you had mentioned, we provide the elements of love. We provide the elements of creating that divine spark, or illuminating that divine spark in other people to want, to desire something bigger and better than what they've ever experienced before. When you go back and ask people, what was the greatest day that you ever had at work? They don't talk about how they just did what they were told. They talk about how they created something new and created something different that had a positive change. Well, if we can tap into that divinity, tap into that creativity, then we can dissolve the power structures that exist today. Because people will say, I'm no longer in alignment with that. I'm going to start speaking up and speaking out and voting with my feet, so to speak, in terms of, am I going to support this organization? Am I going to support that organization? What are they really all about?
What was the tipping point for you? And actually, before I get into that, I think we're seeing a lot more people really starting to do that and saying, this doesn't align with my core values. I need to change. We're seeing a lot of that across the whole globe. But what was the tipping point for you? Like, was it one particular thing? Say, okay, enough is enough. I had enough. And what steps did you take to start your consulting business?
Yeah, so I can't say that it was just one thing. It was one thing after another thing after another thing. So having been downsized a few times in my career, seeing that I lost my occupation due to no fault of my own, but actually the fault of the financial people within the organization who did a poor job of managing the funds. That was a problem. That started to break away some of this conditioning. In addition to that, sitting in a job where I knew how to address the problems that they were facing and only be told, we don't want you to solve these problems, that basically cracked my conditioning. There was a level of cognitive dissonance that was created. And I continued to sit in that mode and contemplate, well, can I sit back and collect a paycheck and be happy? And I realized in my heart that I couldn't. I have to make a difference. I have to provide positive impact for others for me to be aligned to who I am.
And so what was the first step? Like, how did you come up with the idea? Well, I know your experience motivated it, but how did you come up with the idea? I'm going to consult small businesses and try to get them to adapt a new HR model, something more ideal, something that can be a lot more constructive and productive and beneficial.
That's a great question.
First step.
So I started receiving a reputation in Baltimore County for being able to advance organizations and a reputation for my training and development. And so I was asked to lead a public sector organization through a strategic planning session. And, they were like, Ryan, what you bring to the table is so powerful and so important, and it really enables an organization to be successful and thrive. You should be doing this on a higher scale. And I kept hearing that message over and over and over based on the people that I interacted with. And I felt like, honestly, I was being held back in the role that I was performing. So while I was still working in that role, I started building my business. I started, envisioning what I wanted to do in life after that role. I started thinking about what strengths do I have that could benefit people in their lives, and how could I advance work cultures, and how could I advance the notion of human resources to be really in alignment with who we are as humans. And so that is what birthed this notion of HR evolution. I think that oftentimes the reason change in many organizations fails is due to the unconscious beliefs that define the cultures. We're not really sure why we do the things that we do. So to be able to illuminate the things that continue to keep us in our confinements, keep us stuck. And I think that notion of being stuck is what a lot of people are feeling these days.
Yes.
I heard this term, and I really like this term. It's called languishing. And this term languishing is this notion of being stuck. You don't know, the past is behind you, the future's ahead of you, but you're not sure what the future is. It's uncertain, it's chaotic, and you just don't know what to do at this point. So you're a little despondent, a little bit depressed, but you don't want to be where you are in this moment. And that's where I'm trying to meet people where they are in order to take them to where they desire to be. And that takes empathy, that takes compassion, that takes emotional intelligence, that takes holding space and supporting others.
You mentioned that you consult smaller companies. Do you ever believe, or do you believe that it's possible to have a breakthrough with larger companies that's already set in their ways, they have their model? Do you believe that, and I'm sure you do, but I have to ask the question anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Do you believe that you can have that breakthrough, and what do you think it would take to have that breakthrough?
The only way that breakthrough is going to happen is if the leadership that is at the helm of that organization understands it, buys into it, and advocates it. I can sing to the choir all day long, and
Right.
and if they get it, but if they're not in a position of power and authority to effectuate change in the organization, it's likely not going to happen. So
Right.
what I think is important is making sure that we're imparting to the leadership at the helm of the organization, this is what you've been raised to believe. This is the predication and the conditioning that you've been taught in terms of how to run a company. What if you suspend that for a little while to entertain a new way of being? And if you do that, you might experience your goal accomplishment beyond your wildest dreams. Would you be willing to take that trip with me? And let's try to move in that direction. And so if you get the buy-in from the leadership, that will change everything within that corporate environment, because culture is highly predicated on the leaders and what they believe and what they do and what they say.
Right. And it's a strong condition already in place.
It is.
As it pertains to that culture. You talked about writing handbooks and some of the things that you know, that's you know, someone said something to you. Say you talk to an HR guy, like, what do you guys consider when you write handbooks? What do you consider when you write a handbook and you advise a company on employee handbooks?
So what I'm thinking about when a company comes to me and says, hey, we need some kind of guidance around here. They typically come to me because they haven't had any infrastructure. They have it all up here, but they don't have it down in black and white in writing for everyone else to understand. My view of employee handbooks is an opportunity for everyone to get on the same page. This is not an opportunity to tell people you can't do this and you can't do that. If that's your idea of an employee handbook, I'm not your guy. If you want an employee handbook that's going to get everyone on the same page and set the tone for the organization, that's what I'm looking to provide through that employee handbook. And sure, there are elements of, you know, this is what we want to see happen around here. And if these things don't happen, these are the consequences. I think it's important to clearly outline those kind of things so everyone's aware of those things. But it's not a command and control environment. Do what I tell you or else you're out of here. That's not the mindset. And that's where the consciousness and the intention comes in, Clayton, is, you know, what is the intention? And is our doing aligned with that overall intention? You know, all too often, we don't have the opportunity to reflect and stand back and say, well, with what I intended and what actually came out of this, were they in alignment? Or do I need to go back and slightly alter things to make sure that I'm in more coherent alignment with my intention? I think that's an opportunity for organizations. We don't build in that time for reflection within many corporate environments. It's always on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. And meanwhile, we look back and look at our wake and we see that we have created a lot of destruction instead of creation, which we actually intended. But absent that reflection opportunity, we're not processing, we're not learning, we're not growing, we're not adding wisdom to what we're doing. We're just doing.
You're just doing. I don't know how this happened to me. Well, when I spent 20 years at Becton Dickinson BD, and in the course of those 20 years, for some reason or another, I used to get I found myself on a HR advisory email list, and these emails were actually going out to management, advising them on how to avoid certain things in the workplace in terms of, you know, having themselves vulnerable or subjected to employees finding them in the wrong.
Oh my.
Does that make sense? So I was getting these emails, and the main bullet point for most of these emails, it seems like it was almost like an asserted effort to make sure no unions form. And that's what I really want to know. And I want to get your opinion. What do you think about unions?
So I think unions have their place. And I think unions in their original conception have advanced the way that we do work. They've avoided abuses of employees, and we've come a long way as a result of that. And I think unions still do that to some level. I also see that unions have their own egos, their own interests, and sometimes those own interests cut off their nose to spite their face. I think of companies like Caterpillar. You may be familiar with Caterpillar, large, machinery and things like that.
The machinery, yes.
They had a plant in York, Pennsylvania, not far from where I live, where the union every year was fighting and advocating for their employees for increased salaries and increased benefits. And it got to the point where it was so unwieldy that they sold the company, moved their headquarters to Mexico in order to be able to afford their workforce. So in my estimation, the union basically created a pathway for those employees to no longer have a job by their continuous advocacy for raising and raising and raising and raising the rates.
Well, yeah, I understand that. But what do you see? First of all, I'm a firm believer the good outweighs the bad. You're going to have pros and cons and everything. And I feel like there's so much good that comes out of the union that it's worth having. You can't let the negative thing, the things that can slip through the cracks make you destroy a system, because we all know that we're a lot more powerful united. And as far as moving companies, what do you say to a person that believes that that's just an excuse for companies' good PR, when in all actuality, we all believe companies relocate because of labor costs and cheap labor, not really the union?
Yeah. Well, I think that the unions, in as far as making sure that they're providing security and support for the employees and providing a collective voice for the employees as it relates to management and management decision-making, I think there's an opportunity for collaboration and congeniality if it's done appropriately. All too often it's done from a standpoint of conflict. And I just don't think that necessarily has to be the way about it. And I think that, once again, that's predicated on conditioning as well. There's a lot of union buster organizations. Amazon is one example of that. Amazon's doing everything in their power to avoid unionization, and sometimes illegally. So the National Labor Relations Board is going to have their hands full very soon with Amazon and some of the shenanigans that are going on there. I can tell you that.
Yeah, but when you got corporate America, you got corporate structures like Amazon. They're providing so much fuel for every single thing in this country at this point. How do you really fight them through the judicial? Say the word for me.
Judicial
process. I struggle with so. How do you really fight them when they have so much influence? That seems like a lot of the small guy. We don't want to fight a lot of times because they have so much influence and power over the court systems, over everything.
You're exactly right, and I think that we have been, look at who runs organizations, who runs communities, who runs society. It's a very small percentage at the very top that continually calls the tune. And it's up to the remaining percentage to either dance to the tune or say, nope, we got to change the music. And so all too often we have forgotten our collective power as people. And that's where I think that ultimately the change is going to come from. It's the bottom up this time. It's not going to come from the top down. I think buying into the idea that our change will come from the top down is this false notion that has continued to perpetuate what we experience in this top-down authoritarian environment. What will happen is the collective populace of people will enlighten to the concept of this servant leadership mentality, will enlighten to this concept of collaboration over competition, and will start to vote with their feet, so to speak, and say, I'm not investing in that company. I'm not going to apply to work for that company. I don't want to have anything to do with that company. And so where those kind of collective, that bubbling up of consciousness across the workforce is created, management will start to say, hey, if we want a company, we better start changing things around.
We have to adhere to the way the people are moving.
That's exactly right.
Yes. And trying to get people to understand and see clearly that it's hard because of the fear associated with, well, I need my job and I can't afford to, I can't afford to strike with you. I got to cross the picket line. I can't afford to do. I can't.
So
afford
what's
to
making those decisions is fear and not love,
fear.
Clayton.
It's not love, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
So we've got to go back and ask ourselves, how are we operating? Are we operating out of fear or are we operating out of love? Because, that fear typically keeps us in a position being very susceptible to manipulation by others. When we are in the state of fear, we are in fight or flight mode. And if you've ever tried to solve a math problem running away from a bear, good luck, because you're not going to be able to do it. Right? And just the same, you're not going to be able to critically think and analyze and problem solve when you're in a constant state of fear. So if you shift yourself out of that fear-based mindset, you're going to see that you have an infinite amount of choices available to you when you operate from love.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's exactly what we're looking at now in this climate, with this pandemic and everything else. There's so much fear that everyone's losing sight of what they already know.
Yes.
You already know certain things about, your immune system and viruses, and you've had head congestion before. You've had symptoms where you lost taste and smell before. This is nothing new, but we lose sight because there's so much fear. People pass away every year. If I sat, Ryan, and I reported every single death, every single year, or a vast majority of the deaths every single year, it will look exactly like it's looking now.
Yes.
But it's so much sensationalism associated with this virus and things like that. And I definitely believe it's some sort of an agenda, in terms of, getting people vaccinated. Sure. Why do they want so many people? Why do they want global vaccination? Because I feel like the only way you can push a vaccination is to have some type of outbreak or pandemic. So you have to create it. Yep. To me, that's just my opinion. And it comes under great scrutiny when I speak like this, but I can't help what my heart is telling me. I can't ignore it,
I'm with you on that one, Clayton. Yeah. And I'd also like to point to the fact that we all know that what you focus on grows. And so if the focus is constantly fear, then you get more fear. But if the focus is love, you get more love. And so our external environment is constantly flooded with messages of fear. And so we have no other choice but to kind of continue to accumulate these notions of fear unless we start shutting off our TV, unless we start turning off social media, unless we start advocating other perspectives of the world. Imagine if we turned on news and instead of all the doom and gloom that we heard in the fear-based rhetoric, we actually started to talk about, the police officer that helped someone, the community that lifted up someone who was disenfranchised, the environments where people stuck out their neck to support their neighbor. If we continuously heard those messages at the same frequency that we heard the fear messages, what would this world look like? I guarantee it would look a lot different.
It would. Some will say to you that, and some believe this, that those incidents where the police officer is helping or the person is an act of kindness are few and far between, and the majority is the other thing. And I disagree with that. I made a post this morning. Like I tried to get a close personal friend of mine to evaluate their lives, and I asked the question: how much in your personal life have you experienced bad things and been a victim of certain things as opposed to good things? Like me personally, Ryan, I am a person that has experienced profiling by the police. And I've also experienced racism. Some kids burned our garage down. They attacked me coming off the school bus, yelling an N-word, throwing stuff at me. But when I look at the span of my life, I played football for Lock Raven. One of my best friends on the team was Rick Volk, the son of Eric Volk. He played for the coach. Him and I shared a hotel room. I had friends in the neighborhood, that same neighborhood where you had a few, creating this racial tension between myself and my neighbor and them. We also had white friends. We had people that just wasn't on that kind of time. But I've had maybe not even a handful of incidents of that kind of racism and vitriol come my way. And then the vast majority of my life has been the opposite. So which one am I going to give more credence and value to? You know what I'm saying? So
I do.
Yeah, I just, but I understand it because I lived it, but it's not prevalent. It's not as much as I had a friend this morning, P, made a comment. He said, you might have about 5 instances throughout the year that get so sensationalized, it makes it seem like this is the climate.
Yes.
And it's just so frustrating. It's hard because the condition is so great. Some of us, we already come up, with this feeling of being less than. We know this country's history, discrimination, all these things is so embedded in us.
Yep.
So we don't want to see the good sometimes in people. Yeah. Because, part of that victim mentality gives us a reason to fight.
Yes.
We can't dismiss that. And that fight has taken people places. So I understand it from both sides, but I'm definitely a firm believer in what you believe is going to keep manifesting itself in your reality. And the world is what you see it. It's the lens that you have. And I didn't always think this way, but it's like the more you become consciously aware and enlightened, you see something different, So,
and I think a part of this goes back to human nature and how our brains work. Once again, our brains continuously operate and our ego continuously operates on the basis of self-protection. And so we remember the bad things more so because that provides us protection to avoid those bad things in the future. So that's how our brain is wired. And so we are much more likely to, if we get feedback from 10 different people and 9 of them said we're outstanding and they love us, and the one person said, you're all right, you kind of get on my nerves type of thing, we're going to focus on that one negative piece of feedback to our detriment. And that's what I think we are experiencing in the world around us, is we're focusing on the negative instead of the positive. So that is one thing that I would invite all your listeners to focus on is, where's the silver lining in every opportunity in every moment?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think I just want to come back to one other thing in terms of your consulting business. And I just want to hear some testimony of turnaround or some evidence that, trying to, get these companies to have a more idealistic way of doing business and evidence that it's working and it's not just a waste of time. Tell me some of your success stories.
So I'll start with the resumes first and then go into the leadership development and HR consulting. So I've had a lot of people who come to me, and it's typically the 40 to 60 something who are mid-career who come to me and say, Ryan, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And so I help them figure those kinds of things out. We run a number of different assessments to identify their strengths, values, and interests. And then we start to map out their strengths in a way that articulates it for impact for the reader, to create a brand, if you will, around their career. And the people that have come to me, the kind of feedback that I get is, Ryan, not only did I get a great professional resume out of this, I got a new job, I get a 15% increase, and I got my confidence back again. That's the kind of feedback that makes me live on and continue to do what I'm doing.
It's true empowerment.
Now, from a leadership development standpoint, when people come to me and say, I've been working in the corporate environment for 30 years, and this is the best leadership development training I've ever experienced, that tells me something. And it tells me that people, I like to think that I'm pretty good at what I do, but if someone is working in the corporate environment and has just now experienced a good training and leadership development, it tells me that we still have a lot of work to do, that we can really meet people where they are. If politics is downstream from culture, then then culture is certainly downstream from education. And that's where I see my role as an educator. I'm educating folks in terms of the best practices around leadership. I'm educating folks on the best practices around human resource management that really align better to who we are as humans, to bring back in the natural focus that we are biological people, and that does our work environment cohere to who we are as people today in this day and age. And so I've been able to effectuate change throughout people's lives, whether working with them individually in career branding, through leadership development, coaching, and training, and then working on a corporate level with organizations.
That's right. Okay.
One organization that I went into, I created what I called a continuous learning committee. And this is an organization that had very novice leaders. They were never trained, they were never given the support that they needed, and they were just promoted so that they could be kept within the organization. Well, when you promote someone to now no longer be an individual contributor, to now be a steward of the lives of other people in a supervisory and management role, you want to support them with the commensurate training to make them, viable and perform at a high level. I've been able to do that for organizations over and over and over again, and close skill and competency gaps to enable that organization to achieve more, to be more profitable, and to have less turnover and have less toxic environments where people are actually engaged to work for that organization. When you think about engagement, 67% of our total workforce is disengaged, meaning they're only doing just enough to get by and still collect a paycheck. Yeah. What I've been able to do is increase the engagement amount so that so many people are not disengaged where they're just sitting back to collect a paycheck, but people are driving and they're thriving and they're accomplishing more and they're advocating a new way of being. And I think that's what rising tides raises all ships.
Yes, yes. You said something just now, and I want to touch on that, but it slipped my mind. It slipped my mind just that fast. That's that old age coming through, right?
I hear it.
But I think I just want to kind of just close this out, but I want to say something to you that, this is what I wanted to say. So this is the last thing. This is all good in terms of helping businesses that's already existing, but from your personal testimony, your personal side, is there any advice you can offer someone that's on the fence, they want to leave their position and they're thinking about starting their own business, whatever that may be? Do you have any advice, anything you want to share with a person like that?
Making that decision to go out on your own and start your own business or even change your career is not a decision I took lightly. It took a long time for me to really pull the trigger, so to speak, and come to that idea. And so I would say that if it continues to come up for you as something that you're constantly thinking about, you're constantly being reminded that this isn't the way I want to be, that this isn't who I am anymore, that there's so much more out there for me. You need to start paying attention to that and tapping into that, and get quiet, as you had talked about. Get quiet for a moment and really start to spend some time thinking about what future is in alignment with who you are. What do you ultimately want to leave as your legacy before you exit this earth? And if that continues to push you to go out and do something different than you are already, then I would love to talk with you about how I can support you. That there's, once you make that decision, you'd be surprised at how many people show up in your life to help you get along the way that you want to go.
Absolutely. This is great, man. This is a great conversation, because like I said, there's so many people, man, that we feel frustrated, in the workplace. You see things from another aspect in terms of how productive and how counterproductive things can be, following some of these old models of doing business. And yeah, it's just a conversation that needs to be had across the board. And I think that because we're on, we're actually here witnessing the new horizon. I think your company and your consulting business is in the perfect position to consult, because sometimes the conditioning is so great that these companies already have, the culture is already in place. It's hard to break through that, but with so many new businesses, so much empowerment happening in this country, in this community, around the globe, so much of that is going on that you're in the perfect position to advise a lot of these companies and to flourish and to really change the landscape, so to speak,
Well,
across America.
To that point, the people that have already made that decision and said, I'm going in that direction, I'm starting my own company, those are the people that want to do things differently. Those are the people who have already come to the conclusion that I'm not made to work for other people. I'm made to do my own thing. They want to do the best they can by their employees. Sometimes they just don't know what they don't know. And that's where it comes into consulting with someone who has experience in this arena, to be able to pull out from them their vision and apply it to reality and enable them to realize it.
Yes. So, with that, like I said, thanks again, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all that you do, sharing your testimony. I'm a firm believer that, the awakening and becoming conscious and understanding, okay, I can no longer do this, I need to do that. I think it's just a matter of surrendering. And, the reason I started this platform was to encourage and inspire people to understand that who they are is okay. I think if everyone surrenders to their nature and who they naturally are, I think that's the roadmap to wherever life is going to take you, whatever you're going to experience, whatever you're going to cultivate and create for yourself. So it's just a matter of letting go. I'm a firm believer letting go is what really elevates us. So,
and Clayton, I want to thank you for all that you're doing and the inspiration that you've created for so many that watch you on a regular basis. You've been an important part of my life, and carrying carrying a very important message. And I think that you've inspired more people than you even realize. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me. You started off this podcast saying how at times our conversations lift you, but I have to tell you that it lifted me, because I wasn't a person that was extremely confident in some of the things I felt or my insight or my thoughts or whatever I believe. And so openly sharing that, to have a person like yourself even find interest in what I'm talking about, or even finding that connection and being able to relate on that level, did wonders for me. Like, it did wonders for me, for my confidence. And also, it just keeps me going, understanding that I'm not alone. Understanding that you're not alone in a lot of things you think. That's the medicine. To me, that's the key to, eliminating a lot of these mental health issues. And that's a whole nother conversation. But Indeed. This is what you've done for me. You helped me maintain my sanity. Just seeing and reading your thoughts, although we come from different worlds, it's just so much evidence that we're all connected to a collective thing.
We're part of the vibe tribe. We vibe together, man.
Exactly.
You gotta find your vibe tribe.
You gotta find your vibe tribe. That's a good way to put it. So with that, fam, I just want to close this show out. I want to thank everybody for checking out the podcast and listening. Remember, as I always say, who you are is okay. Who you are is actually better than okay. Who you are is divine. Focus on good things. Love is who you are. And y'all have a great rest of the day whenever you wind up hearing this podcast.